This is the centre cross member which supports the rear of the gearbox, and it also helps to tie both chassis rails together. This particular one isn't from this van, it actually came with the donor engine. I've got it here because the next job is to sort the fuel lines out, and to do that I need this bracket. Because the engine's fuel injected, it needs a high pressure fuel pump which is located here along with the filter. The assembly is held on with a few bolts which pick up on these cage nuts. These are used all over the Trafic and can often be a pain to remove if they're seized. The bolts tend to rust over time, and as the cage is only made of plastic, it's quite common for them to just spin without coming undone. Which is exactly what's happened on this one. Luckily, access underneath was okay, so I'm able to use some mould grips to stop the nut spinning. I can see though that from a manufacturing point of view these make perfect sense. After all, you only need access to one side, and when everything's all shiny and new, any rust issues just aren't a factor. This is the new fuel pump which clamps into place on the bracket, or at least it would do if the top part of the clamp wasn't missing. Still, it's only a curved piece of steel, so how hard can it be to make? Before I fit the assembly, I need to take a look at the fuel pickup/sender unit, and to get to that I need to remove this plastic guard. It's held on with a couple of bolts, and with the two tabs also released I can remove it out of the way. This is the fuel pickup unit. It incorporates the flow and return pipes as well as the level sender. Now this unit was working fine before, but unfortunately it's no good for the 2.2 engine because the fuel lines are a much smaller diameter and this could potentially cause issues due to the restricted flow. So my only option is to swap it out for one with a larger bore size. You can use a strap wrench for this, but I found the block of wood and a hammer technique works well too. It's quite a fiddly job at the best of times, but only having one arm free certainly doesn't help things. Come on. There we go. The fuel lines for the 1.7 engine ran down the driver's side chassis rail, and they're held in place with these plastic clips. And with those off, I can pull the hoses through and extract them from the van. This is the pickup unit which I'm hoping to use. You can see how much larger the pipe diameter is. I believe this one actually came from a diesel model, but the bore size is correct, so it should still work fine. With that done, the next job is to mount the bracket in place, and with this being an earlier van, it doesn't have any holes from the factory. This does of course mean that I can't use those cage nuts, but to be honest I'm not sorry, because they just rust over time and seize up, especially on the underside here. And a bit of zinc primer will help to stop the metal corroding. While I wait for that to dry, I'll tackle a few other jobs, the first of which is the speedo cable. Now this connects in exactly the same way as before, so it's just a case of lining the inner square drive up and pressing it home. This bracket can now go back on. All it does is help keep the power steering pipe secure and out of the way of things like the drive shaft. With the paint now dry, I can drop a couple of bolts down the holes, and all I need to do is get a nut on the underside. Oh, and ideally a washer too. And all through this opening in the crossmember through which my hand barely fits.
That's it, it's started. There we go, there's one. That works. That's it. Oh, that's tight. There we go, both tight.
The pump can now be clamped in position and plumbed into the tank. I'm fitting all new hoses and clamps here, as it's just not worth taking the risk using the old ones. The filter is next, and I need to make sure I get it in the right way round for the direction of flow. The original fuel lines were made of a hard plastic with rubber hoses crimped on either end. Now I haven't got anything like that in the right size, and even if I did, I'd much rather fit new ones for peace of mind. I do have some 8mm copper pipe though, which should be perfect. It just needs cutting to length and deburring. And I'll blow down the ends to make sure there's no debris left inside. The fuel lines on the 2.2 models run along the passenger side chassis leg, and to hold them in place I've reused those clips from before. The route isn't that complex, but the copper still needs bending in the right places to make it sit right. I like to take my time with this kind of job. It's easy to bend it, but it's harder to straighten it back if it's in the wrong place, so I just do it bit by bit. And like before, I've gone for all new hoses up to the fuel rail. This is the old fuel pump which came with that other cross member, and the only bit I need to salvage is the wiring. The terminals were a bit corroded, but a quick clean up with some memory paper will sort that out. Right, with that on the new pump, the connector can be secured to the chassis using one of these pre-existing holes. Next up is the crankshaft sensor. Now this is the original one from the donor engine, and I did test it a couple of years ago when I had to do some fault finding on my other van, and it was working fine then, so fingers crossed it's still okay. I would ideally fit a new one, but unfortunately these are now discontinued. Still, as long as it works, that's all that matters. The connector on this has a bracket which picks up on one of the bell housing bolts, which I forgot about before, so that needs removing. The 2.2 engine is unique in that the crankshaft sensor feeds back into the ECU rather than going straight to the ignition module like on the 1.7 and 2 litre models. Next up is the manifold air pressure sensor, or MAP for short. This locates on the bulkhead directly above the engine, and it tells the ECU how much suction there is in the inlet manifold. I don't have the original bracket, but another rummage through the workshop and I've come up with this, which should be perfect. The MAP sensor is vital to the smooth running of the engine. Without it, the fuel mix should be all over the place. This was actually one of the issues I had with my other van. The rubber hose had cracked and was letting air in, which caused the engine to run rough. and it connects with a single 3-pin connector. The air hose simply pushes on with the snug fit, and it doesn't really need a clamp as it's under suction anyway, so it can't blow off. And the other end needs connecting to one of the hose barbs on the inlet manifold. Now, if you haven't worked out already, my goal at this stage is to get the engine to fire up, so my main focus is on anything which might stop it running. One of those things is the vacuum hose for the brake servo, as without it the inlet manifold would suck air in and would likely mess the mixture up. The original hose is now too short as the inlet manifold has swapped sides, so a longer one is needed. This is just a standard 12mm rubber air hose. With it in position, I can cut it to length and fix it on the manifold. Right, only a couple of jobs left now before I can turn the key, and next up is the exhaust downpipe. I nearly forgot the king lead, but that's straightforward enough. Right, time to crank it over. I'll give it a few clicks on the ignition to help prime the fuel pump. Oh, for Right, 2 days later, and I think I might have worked out what I've done wrong. We're not getting any pressure in the fuel rail.